Okay. Good evening, everybody. It is May 2nd, Friday at 6:04 p.m., and I am glad that you are back with us, joining us. As you can see, my campaign manager, Lynn Speed, is sitting right next to me, who is getting used to not having to look at the screen and look at the camera instead. It's a little jarring, I know. But the reason I have her on here is because tomorrow, the Vega for Congress campaign is hosting a fundraiser in the Bronx. There's a graphic of it. And we are asking people, hey, man, we are asking people to help us. It's a fundraiser to keep the campaign going and only accelerate from the momentum that we have right now. So I'm actually going to pass it off to Lynn to say more. So, Lynn, please go right ahead.
Okay, well, as Jose said, tomorrow we are doing a fundraiser, which is really going to launch in a big way his campaign for Congress against Richie Torres. And the primary, of course, will not be until 2026. But if we get started in a very, very big way now, we can make a huge difference. It's appropriate for several reasons. Number one, we're entering right now the period of the 250th anniversary, the celebration of the birth of the nation. The actual history of the founding of this nation is much, much different than anyone is describing. It's completely different from what the woke crowd believes, and it's completely different than the landowners and businessmen who wanted to be their own little oligarchs. This was the first truly anti-colonial, anti-imperial successful revolution in the world, and virtually everybody in the world that could get here to participate in it did participate in it, including numbers of enslaved people, numbers of free Blacks, Native Americans, people from Haiti, and of course, people from throughout Europe and so on were involved. But we are reviving that spirit, and that's the essence of Jose's campaign. It's this idea of thinking, acting, and being independent, which depends on the citizens. So unlike Richie Torres, our campaign is not financed by the big PACs. Jose has neither been offered nor, I think, would accept any money from APAC or related operations. We depend on the citizens acting as real citizens. And a large part of what we're going to do with the campaign is conduct an education so that people understand what true citizenship is by understanding what the real American Revolution was all about. So as we said, we want to start this in a big way. We have had an objective of raising $50,000 to get this campaign off the ground and have enough funds to sustain the campaign and expand the campaign. We now have an office. That's where we're sitting now, which we did not have a year ago. We have a staff, a moderate but growing volunteer staff. So we need to be able to support all of these things. So I'm asking everybody that's viewing this to contribute as generously as they can and help us by the time we get to tomorrow to know that we have in hand or in pledges as close as we can get to that $50,000. I think right now, since we started this about 3 weeks ago, we've raised about $12,000 towards that goal. So we need a lot more. The legal limit is $3,500 that anyone can contribute. That's set by the Federal Election Commission. And Jose is putting the donation link in now. So make your donation. Make it early and often, as they say. So,
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Hopefully somebody will recalibrate the camera now. You are relieved of your duty for now. Thank you for sitting next to me and helping us with that. So for I just kind of want to address, and don't worry that I look darker all of a sudden. I've been told that my whole life. That's just something, a problem with the lighting, not really something we can fix right this second, mostly because the light is behind me. But if you are somebody who is new here for the first time, maybe you saw me on Ryan Mata's show, maybe you saw some interviews I did with the homeless left, or maybe you saw the fact that I was just trending and because one of my interventions, actually two of my interventions recently have gone viral again, whether it was the one I was yelling at Paul Krugman, although for you, you may not have known who I was yelling at. It starts with me saying that, maybe North Carolina should rename itself Israel so it'll get $20 billion in aid. The person I was yelling at was Paul Krugman. I want to give you a little bit of a taste of exactly what it is that I'm involved with, what I do, and why I do what I do. This morning marked the 100th meeting of the International Peace Coalition. And this was honestly how you would it there's no better way of explaining, first of all, what the IPC is. Then first let me just read you who was actually on. It was Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and initiator of the International Peace Coalition, which came from an idea that said we need to have sort of a council of reason, basically experts, people who are knowledgeable in these fields, who have been involved in trying to get together, deals, ceasefires, trying to bring international cooperation and development together. We need to get them together, and people need to be briefed on what's actually going on, but also be giving some kind of marching orders so they're not just blindly in the streets expressing only rage, but that there's a discipline behind what they're actually saying. And so today we had on Helga, we had on Colonel Richard Black, who was the former head of the U.S. Army's Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, and he was a former Virginia state senator. We had Ambassador Hossein Mousavian, former ambassador from Iran to Germany. We had Ofer Bronstein, a former advisor of President Yitzhak Rabin, president of the Paris-based International Peace Forum, author of a reconstruction plan for an independent Palestine state, including rail, energy, and water infrastructure. Jonathan Kutab, international human rights lawyer, executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America, and co-founder of Nonviolence International. Maoz Inan, who gave a video statement, who is an Israeli peace activist. And what was important about what he had to say is that he is currently trying to get peace right now between Palestine and Israel, even though his own parents were killed on October 7th. And then we also had a report from Robert Castle, somebody who is very involved in my campaign, but also just a general report on what's going on the ground. And the way the IPC started was you had all these people on, and you had the former ambassador getting into a fight with Ted Cruz on X. And Ted Cruz is saying you need to leave the country. And then the ambassador was responding by saying, well, maybe we should have a debate. And Ted Cruz said, no, you should just be deported. And then the person who got on, the former advisor of President Yitzhak Rabin, said that he has briefing Macron, right? So the level of discussion and people who were on this international peace call marking the 100th call today was extremely exciting. And I would just ask you, when this is over now and after Diane's show at 7:30, that you go and check out that live stream, because honestly, it was historic. And it's all happening right now in a time of great turbulence. I'm sure some of you may have seen the statement from Marjorie Taylor Greene saying she's no longer supporting the administration and what it's doing. She campaigned on fighting against foreign wars, and now she's saying it looks like we're going to get into a war with Iran, which she doesn't actually support. And so, I would just say, definitely, if you want to be involved in the forefront of actually changing and shaping history, this is the right place to be in, whether it's through my campaign or through the International Peace Coalition or through the other means that we're organizing with or involved with. This is the place to be. And so before I pass it off to Dennis, Nancy Strickland asked, I had a doctor's appointment this morning, so I missed it. Can I still see it? Yes, you can. Schiller Institute YouTube channel. The The live stream is there. Only the first hour and a half is live, and then the discussion that ensued afterwards is not live streamed. So if you want to be a part of the discussions, definitely you want to register on the website and get on the Zoom. So with that, I'm now going to bring up Dennis Speed. So Dennis, are you there?
Yeah, I am. You able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I want to welcome everybody, especially people that may not have been here before. And what we do is we read or discuss uh, various of the writers, of the writings, excuse me, of the poet and the revolutionary figure Edgar Poe. Not Edgar Allan Poe, Edgar Poe. Uh, Poe, who wrote his last works in the Bronx, only a few miles from where our office is the lost soul of America. He was born in 1809 and he was killed in 1849. That's not stated to be the case. It said that instead he sort of died of a kind of drunken stupor, but that is not as what occurred. No less a personage than the President of the United States, James Garfield, who himself was assassinated, signed a letter that was being circulated by others in addition that encouraged a doctor by the name of Moran, I believe James Moran, who attended Poe in 1849 to encourage and encouraged him in his pursuit of the truth about uh, the cover up of the assassination of Edgar Poe. We intend by raising that to attempt to raise various controversies that should be raised. You just heard Jose say a few things that I know people will uh, perhaps wish to not believe. I mean, to give you another example, uh, people have heard of the film director Oliver Stone. At last week's meeting of the International Peace Coalition, someone that you may not have heard of, Ray McGovern, was a Central Intelligence Agency briefer and agent for 27 years, was on our platform. Ray has, since the 1990s in particular, been very active against uh, what he calls the insanity of war and the insanity of American foreign policy. He's a co-founder of an organization called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And this organization was created back in 2003, 22 years ago, to stop the Iraq War. Today, we are 2 days after the 50th anniversary of the defeat of the United States in Vietnam, what was called the Fall of Saigon. That on April 30th of 1975, 50 years ago, the North Vietnamese army broke through the gates of that city and then occupied what was the capital of South Vietnam. That city, of course, is now Ho Chi Minh City. At the end of that war, in which probably 3 million, upwards of 3 million Vietnamese were killed, the country of Vietnam had 46 million people. It now has 100 million people. And 80% of those people were not born when the Vietnam War ended. Matter of fact, only about 10% of their population, only about 10 million people, would have an active, vibrant, living memory of that war. Most of that population only knows about it as a legend. And they live not in Saigon, they live in Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh is a great hero, as he should be, of Vietnam, but you never even hear the name Ho Chi Minh in America. And you certainly don't hear about the prosperity, the relative prosperity of the people of Vietnam. And you don't hear about their friendliness and their interest in people from the United States. Why? The reason we read these stories is the same reason that we ask you that question. Why did nobody tell you? Why are you unaware? Probably that 2 days ago was the 50th anniversary of the end of the war in Vietnam, a war which still haunts the streets of the United States as it no longer haunts the streets of Vietnam, where millions were killed and napalm was dropped and all sorts of havoc was raised. People just go about their lives. Everything is good. People are happy. Median age of the whole population is 33. And then you look at the United States. And the effect of that war not only resonates all over the United States in the form of the Vietnam veterans, but in every various drug and suicide epidemic in this country. When you talk about fentanyl, when you talk about crack, when you talk about suicide, you're talking about the effects of the destruction of the United States in the Vietnam War. The United States destroyed itself in the Vietnam War, and the echoes of that destruction and of that policy are what you're living with now. Matter of fact, we've just all we do is fight wars. China's last war was 1979. America has had at least 13 wars since that time. And most of the wealth of the actual nation itself has been destroyed, squandered. Physical wealth, I'm talking about, not the money, which is a different matter. We want to move into our story because to read it will take us approximately an hour. And I want to say something about this story and about the personage of Poe. People like to associate Poe or have associated Poe with various matters of horror or the unusual. And the unusual, perhaps, is a good idea to talk about Poe. But Poe was interested in the concept of beauty and how that concept could be conveyed, assimilated, adopted, and amplified by Americans. He was born, as I said, in 1809. So, technically speaking, the United States, as we know it, the Federal Republic of the United States, was only 20 years old when he was born. He was an active author by the time he was 13 years old, published some of his first poetry when he was 13. And so the country was then 33 years old. And even by the time that he died, the country was then 60 years old. He lived for 40 years, and the country was 20 years old when he was born. So his interest was in creating a new American voice filled with the promise of the revolution, and also recognizing the flaws and recognizing the combative condition in which this country existed because it was not the world's great superpower. Matter of fact, it was a renegade nation. It was a nation which no head of state would visit because it was a revolutionary nation. It was seen sort of the way you think about the United States seeing Cuba. That's how people saw the United States. And so he and others were involved in a campaign which involved their trying to preserve the American Revolution through, in part, literary battles. It may sound unusual today, but you have to think about a time where there's no television, there's no radio, there's no internet, there's no telephone. There would be the telegraph that would be invented by one of Poe's associates, co-invented, Samuel Morse. But the writing of news of poetry and stories was a major pastime in America, and it was a major way to affect things in America. So it was a very different thing. So tonight's story is being read because of what we read last week. If you were with us last week, we read a story called Landor's Cottage. And it talked about an area, ostensibly, is said to have talked about an area which was that area around the Bronx where Poe resided. That's not true in my view. If you read various people talking about it, that's what they say. I don't believe any such thing. But I say that for a reason, not for you to believe me. But if you look at that story begins. It says that Landor's cottage is a pendant, an appendage, in other words, to another story, which is called the Landscape Garden, the Domain of Arnheim. So this is what we're going to read tonight. And what I'd like to do, Jose, is I'd like to I'll start us off, but I'd like to have three readers ready to go because it's all a one person, first person narrative. So why don't you go next, and then let's pick a couple people to go. If you even get three or four, and we're going to try to go through this. Let me also say to people, we won't stop for explanations of some of the people that he's going to reference. In the first paragraph, he's going to reference various authors like Turgot, Priestley, Condorcet. I'll only say about Condorcet, he was a Frenchman who was killed during the period of the French Revolution, and was a had a notion of happiness, which was considered to be illusory. But I'll just reference him. But I'm not. We're not going to stop and do all that because we want to give you the impression of what he is talking about. If there are questions and you have them and you're going to leave something in the chat about a particular term or a particular individual, please do that. And we'll return to those if we can. And if we can't get through that tonight by the time that we want to end, we'll take it up in our next session. So I'll start us off and then Jose, you pick it up, okay?
Sure. Yep. No problem.
All right. The Landscape Garden, the Domain of Arnheim, an essay. The garden like a lady fair was cut, that lay as if she slumbered in delight, and to the open skies her eyes did shut. The azure fields of heaven were assembled right in a large round set with the flowers of light. The flowers de luce and the round sparks of dew that hung upon their azure leaves did show like twinkling stars that sparkle in the evening blue. Giles Fletcher. From his cradle to his grave, a gale of prosperity bore my friend Ellison along. Nor do I use the word prosperity in its mere worldly sense. I mean it as synonymous with happiness. The person of whom I speak, Ellison, seemed born for the purpose of foreshadowing the doctrines of Turgot, Price, Priestley, and Condorcet, of exemplifying by individual instance what has been deemed the chimera of the perfectionists. That means illusion or unreachable goal, chimera. In the brief existence of Ellison, I fancy that I have seen refuted the dogma that in man's very nature lies some hidden principle, the antagonist of bliss. An anxious examination of his character has given me to understand that, in general, from the violation of a few simple laws of humanity arises the wretchedness of mankind. That as a species we have in our possession the as yet unwrought elements of content, and that even now, in the present darkness and madness of all thought on the great question of the social condition, it is not impossible that man, the individual, under certain unusual and highly fortuitous conditions, may be happy. With opinions such as these, my young friend, too, was fully imbued, and thus it is worthy of observation that the uninterrupted enjoyment which distinguished his life was in great measure the result of pre-concert. It is indeed evident that with less of the instinctive philosophy which now and then stands so well in the stead of experience, Mr. Ellison would have found himself precipitated by the very extraordinary successes of his life into the common vortex of unhappiness which yawns for those of preeminent endowments. But it is by no means my object to pen an essay on happiness. The ideas of my friend may be summed up in a few words. He admitted but four elementary principles, or more strictly, conditions of bliss. That which he considered chief was, strange to say, the simple and purely physical one of free exercise in the open air. The health, he said, attainable by other means is scarcely worth the name. He instanced the ecstasies of the fox hunter and pointed to the tillers of the earth, the only people who, as a class, can be fairly considered happier than others. His second condition was the love of woman. His third and most difficult of realization was the contempt of ambition. His fourth was an object of unceasing pursuit, and he held that, other things being equal, the extent of obtainable happiness was in proportion to the spirituality of the object. I'll do one more paragraph. Ellison was remarkable in the continuous profusion of good gifts lavished upon him by fortune. In personal grace and beauty, he exceeded all men. His intellect was of that order to which the acquisition of knowledge is less a labor than an intuition and a necessity. His family was one of the most illustrious of the empire. His bride was the loveliest and most devoted of women. His possessions had been always simple, but on the attainment of his majority, meaning his maturity, it was discovered that one of those extraordinary freaks of fate had been played in his behalf, which startle the whole social world amid which they occur, and seldom fail radically to alter the moral condition of those who are their objects.
Okay, I'll take over. And just by the way, for those of who are reading along with what I have on the screen, there are certain words that might be different than what Dennis is saying. If you're new here, that's normal, and we won't go into why. But just know, don't freak out if that happens a lot.
It means that there are different editions, and the edition that I have is somewhat closer to what Poe actually wrote, and there are reasons for that we can discuss, which are rather interesting. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're picking back up at it appears that. It appears that about 100 years before Mr. Ellison's coming of age, there had died in a remote province one Mr. Seabright Ellison. This gentleman had amassed a princely fortune, and having no immediate connections, conceived the whim of suffering his wealth to accumulate for a century after his decease. Minutely and sagaciously directing the various modes of investment, he bequeathed the aggregate amount to the nearest of blood, bearing the name of Ellison, who should be alive at the end of the 100 years. Many attempts had been made to set aside this singular bequest. Their ex post facto character rendered them abortive, but the attention of a jealous government was aroused, and a legislative act finally obtained forbidding all similar accumulations. This act, however, did not prevent young Ellison from entering into possession on his 21st birthday, as the heir of his ancestor Seabright, of a fortune of $450 million.
That's about $18 billion in today's money. Basically, it's about 40 times whatever we're about to read. So just keep that in mind. Go ahead.
Okay. When it had become known that such was the enormous wealth inherited, there were, of course, many speculations as to the mode of its disposal. The magnitude and the immediate availability of the sum bewildered all who thought on the topic. The possessor of any appreciable amount of money might have been imagined to perform any one of 1,000 things. With riches merely surpassing those of any citizen, it would have been easy to suppose him engaging to supreme excess in the fashionable extravagances of his time, or busying himself with political intrigue, or aiming at ministerial power, or purchasing increase of nobility, or collecting large museums of virtu, or playing the munificent patron of letters, of science, of art, or endowing and bestowing his name upon extensive institutions of charity. But for the inconceivable wealth in the actual possession of the air, these objects and all ordinary objects were felt to afford too limited a field. Recourse was recourse was recourse was it was had to figures, and these but suffice to confound. It was seen that, even at 3%, the annual income of the inheritance amounted to no less than $13,500,000, which was $1,125,000 per month, or $36,986 per day, or $1,541 per hour, or $6 and $20 for every minute that flew. Thus, the usual track of supposition was thoroughly broken up. Men knew not what to imagine. There were some who even conceived that Mr. Ellison would divest himself of at least one half of his fortune, as of utterly superfluous opulence, enriching whole troops of his relatives by division of his superabundance. To the nearest of these he did, in fact, abandon the very unusual wealth which was his own before the inheritance. Okay, I'll do this next paragraph and then you can take over. I was not surprised, however, to perceive that he had long made up his mind on a point which had occasioned so much discussion to his friends, nor was I greatly astonished at the nature of his decision. In regard to individual charities, he had satisfied his conscience. In the possibility of any improvement, properly so called, being effected by man himself in the general condition of man, he had, I am sorry to confess it, little faith. Upon the whole, whether happily or unhappily, he was thrown back in very great measure upon self.
We're gonna pick up in the widest. In the widest and noblest sense, he was a poet. He comprehended, moreover, the true character, the august aims, the supreme majesty and dignity of the poetic sentiment. The fullest, if not the sole proper satisfaction of this sentiment, he instinctively felt to lie in the creation of novel forms of beauty. Some peculiarities, either in his early education or in the nature of his intellect, had tinged what was is termed materialism as all ethical speculations. And it was this bias, perhaps, which led him to believe that the most advantageous, at least, if not the sole legitimate field for the poetic exercise, lies in the creation of novel moods of purely physical loveliness. Thus it happened, he became neither musician nor poet, if we use this latter term in its everyday appreciation. Or it might have been that he neglected to become either merely in pursuance of his idea that in contempt of ambition is to be found one of the essential principles of happiness on earth. It is not, indeed, possible that, while that high order of genius is necessarily ambitious, the highest is above that which is termed ambition. And may it not thus happen that many far greater than Milton have contentedly remained mute and inglorious? I believe that the world has never seen, and that unless through some series of accidents goading the noblest order of the mind into disasterful exertion, the world will never see that full extent of triumphant execution in the richer domains of art of which the human nature is absolutely capable. Ellison became neither musician nor poet, although no man lived more profoundly enamored of music and poetry. Under other circumstances than those which invested him, it is not impossible that he would have become a painter. Sculpture, although in its nature rigorously poetical, was too limited in its extent and consequences to have occupied at any time much of his attention. And I have now mentioned all the provinces in which the common understanding of the poetic sentiment has declared it capable of expatiating. But Ellison maintained that the richest, the truest, and most natural, if not altogether the most extensive province, had been unaccountably neglected. No definition had spoken the landscape gardener as of the poet. Yet it seemed to my friend that the creation of the landscape garden offered to the proper muse the most magnificent of opportunities. Here, indeed, was the fairest field for the display of imagination in the endless combining of forms of novel beauty, the elements to either to enter into combination, being by a vast superiority the most glorious which the earth could afford. In the multiform and multicolor of the flowers and the trees, he recognized the most direct and energetic efforts of nature at physical loveliness. And in the direction or concentration of this effort, or more properly, in its adaptation to the eyes which were to behold it on earth, he perceived that he should be employing the best means, laboring to the greatest advantage, in the fulfillment not only of his destiny as poet, but of the august purposes for which the deity had implanted the poetic sentiment in man. I'll finish this last paragraph and then hand it off to Robert. And quote, its adaptation to the eyes which were to behold it on earth. In his explanation of this phraseology, Mr. Ellison did much toward solving that was always seemed to be and to me always seemed to me an enigma. I mean the fact which none but the ignorant dispute, that no such combination of scenery exists in nature as the painter of genius may produce. No such paradises are to be found in reality as have glowed on the canvas of cloud. In the most enchanting of natural landscapes, there will always be found a defect or an excess, many excesses and defects. While the competent parts may defy, individually, the highest skill of the artist, the arrangement of these parts will always be susceptible of improvement. In short, no position can be attained on the wide surface of the natural earth from which an artistical eye, looking steadily, will not find matter of offense in which is termed the composition of the landscape. And yet, how unintelligible is this? In all other matters, we are justly instructed to regard nature as supreme. With her details, we shrink from competition. Who shall presume to imitate the colors of the tulip or to improve the proportions of the lily of the valley? The criticism which says of sculpture or portraiture that here nature is to be exalted or idealized rather than imitated is an error. No pictorial or sculptural combinations of points of human loveliness do more than approach the living and breathing beauty. In landscape alone is the principle of the critic true, and, having felt its truth here, it is but the headlong spirit of generalization which has led him to pronounce it true throughout all the domains of art. Having, I say, felt its truth here, for the feeling is no affectation or chimera, the mathematics afford no more absolute demonstrations than the sentiments of his art yields the artist. He not only believes, but positively knows that such and such apparently arbitrary arrangements of matter constitute and alone constitute the true beauty. His reasons, however, have not been matured into expression. It remains for a more profound analysis than the world has yet seen, fully to investigate and express them. Nevertheless, he is confirmed in his instinctive opinions by the voice of all his brethren. Let a composition be defective. Let a emendation be wrought in its mere arrangement of form. Let this emendation be submitted to every artist in the world. By each will its necessity be admitted. And even far more than this, in remedy of the defective composition, each insulated member of the fraternity would have suggested the identical emendation.
I repeat that in landscape arrangements alone is the physical nature susceptible of exaltation, and that, therefore, her susceptibility of improvement at this one point was a mystery I had been unable to solve. My own thoughts on the subject had rested in the idea that the primitive intention of nature would have so arranged the earth's surface as to have fulfilled at all points man's sense of perfection in the beautiful, the sublime. or the picturesque, but that this primitive intention had been frustrated by the known geological disturbances, disturbances of form and color grouping, in the correction or allaying of which lies the soul of art. The force of this idea was much weakened, however, by the necessity which it involved of considering the disturbances abnormal and unadapted to any purpose. It was Ellison who suggested that they were prognostic of death. He thus explained, "Admit the earthly immortality of man to have been the first intention. We have then the primitive arrangement of the earth's surface adapted to his blissful estate, as not existent, but designed. The disturbances were the preparations for his subsequently conceived deathful condition."
Okay, let's stop for a minute. People understand what's going on here or what he's saying? Robert, you want to say something about what you just read?
Well, he's talking about his thoughts in relation to Ellison's concept of landscape gardening, which Ellison had selected as the most fitting or the only proper pursuit of his own life, having received this unimaginable bequest.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of that in the paragraph I just read, he seems to be trying to develop a theory of beauty with respect to the art of landscape gardening, and to understand how the principles of composition of the human mind could express an ideal beauty which is apparent in nature but not there in absolute perfection or something like that.
Right. And that in this particular paragraph, what is happening is that the person that we don't know who this person is, the person that is narrating this to us, telling us the story, it says, I repeat that in landscape arrangements alone is the physical nature susceptible of exaltation, and that therefore her susceptibility of improvement at this one point was a mystery I had been unable to solve. My own thoughts on the subject had rested in the idea that the primitive intention of nature would have so arranged the earth's surface as to have fulfilled at all points man's sense of perfection in the beautiful, the sublime, or the picturesque, but that this primitive intention had been frustrated by the known geological disturbances, like earthquakes, for example. That would be one, right? And that this is a disturbance. And he's saying that Ellison suggested that they were prognostic of death.
Wow.
That's what he's saying here. That's what, okay. I mean, that's what it literally says. And then he thus explained, or did you finish that?
Yeah, I read that, but
Yeah.
maybe read it again, or should you
Yeah,
want to?
please read it again.
He thus explained, "Admit the earthly immortality of man to have been the first intention. We have then the primitive arrangement of the earth's surface adapted to his blissful estate, not as existent, but designed. The disturbances were the preparations for his subsequently conceived deathful condition."
Okay, go ahead.
"Now," said my friend, "what we regard as exaltation of the landscape may be really such as respects only the mortal or human point of view. Each alteration of the natural scenery may possibly affect a blemish in the picture, if we can suppose this picture viewed at large, in mass, from some point distant from the earth's surface, although not beyond the limits of its atmosphere. It is easily understood that what might improve a closely scrutinized detail may at the same time injure a general or more distantly observed effect. There may be a class of beings, human once, but now invisible to humanity, to whom, from afar, our disorder may seem order, our unpicturesqueness picturesque. In a word, the earth angels, for whose scrutiny, more especially than our own, and for whose death-refined appreciation of the beautiful may have been set in array by God the wide landscape gardens of the hemispheres. In the course of the discussion, my friend quoted some passages from a writer on landscape gardening who has been supposed to have well treated his theme. Quote, "There are properly but two styles of landscape gardening, the natural and the artificial. One seeks to recall the original beauty of the country by adapting its means to the surrounding scenery, cultivating trees in harmony with the hills or plain of the neighboring land, detecting and bringing into practice those nice relations of size, proportion, and color which, hid from the common observer, are revealed everywhere to the experienced student of nature. The result of the natural style of gardening is seen rather in the absence of all defects and incongruities, in the prevalence of a healthy harmony and order, than in the creation of any special wonders or miracles. The artificial style has as many varieties as there are different tastes to gratify. It has a certain general relation to the various styles of building. There are the stately avenues and retirements of Versailles, Italian terraces, and a various mixed Old English style which bears some relation to the domestic Gothic or English Elizabethan architecture. Whatever may be said against the abuses of the artificial landscape gardening, a mixture of pure art in a garden scene adds to it a great beauty. This is partly pleasing to the eye by the show of order and design, and partly moral. A terrace with an old moss-covered balustrade calls up at once to the eye the fair forms that have pressed there in other days. The slightest exhibition of art is an evidence of care and human interest. You want to read?
From what I have already observed, said Ellison, you will understand that I reject the idea here expressed of recalling the original beauty of the country. The original beauty is never so great as that which may be introduced. Of course, everything depends on the selection of a spot with capabilities. What is said about detecting and bringing into practice nice relations of size, proportion, and color is one of those mere vaguenesses of speech which serve to veil inaccuracy of thought. The phrase quoted may mean anything or nothing, and guides in no degree. That the true result of the natural style of gardening is seen rather in the absence of all defects and incongruities than in the creation of any special wonders or miracles, is a proportion better suited to the groveling apprehension of the herd than to the fervid dreams of the man of genius. The negative merit suggested appertains to that hobbling criticism which, in letters, would elevate Addison into apotheosis. In truth, while that virtue which consists in the mere avoidance of vice appeals directly to the understanding, and can thus be circumscribed in rule, the loftier virtue, which flames in creation, can be apprehended in its results alone. Rule applies but to the merits of denial, to the excellencies which refrain. Beyond these, the critical art can but suggest. We may be instructed to build a Cato, but we are in vain told how to conceive a Parthenon or an Inferno.
Okay, stop for a minute. Just want to make sure that people are able to follow this. Um, that the true result of the natural style of gardening is seen rather in the absence of defects and incongruities than in the creation of any special wonders and miracles, is a proposition better suited to the groveling apprehension of the herd. This is the idea of Old Testament, thou shalt not. The negative virtue suggested appertains, negative virtue meaning the virtues of the Ten Commandments. They're negative virtues. You don't do those things, it's virtuous. Um, appertains to the hobbling criticism which in letters would elevate Addison. Addison and Steele were the creators of a magazine called The Spectator, like in 1711, and they were not, shall we say, the most elevated of authors, put it that way. You're elevating Addison into apotheosis. That's what he's referring to there. And then in truth, while that virtue which consists in the mere avoidance of vice appeals directly to the understanding and can thus be circumscribed as a rule, the loftier merit which flames in creation can be apprehended in its results alone. That's the thing that some of you will remember from Paul's epistle to the Romans. The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. Meaning that I follow all the rules, and because I follow all the rules, I am a good person. And Paul at the time is arguing with the Jews about their non-acceptance of what were called the Gentiles. And he's saying, well, the Gentiles are not circumcised in the flesh. They are circumcised in the spirit, which is better. You were circumcised in the flesh. You follow all of the laws because they are laws. But they don't have these, and they follow Christ, which is better. And so that's and then the final thing is when it says we may be instructed to build a Cato. Cato was a 1st century BC Roman consul who was known for upholding the tradition of the Senate against any change. So he was a big one on prohibition. So that's what it means there, being instructed to build a Cato, but we are in vain told how to conceive a Parthenon or an Inferno. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, that thing done, however, the wonder accomplished, and the capacity for apprehension becomes universal. The sophists of the negative school, who through inability to create have scoffed at creation, are now found the loudest in applause. What in its chrysalis condition of principle affronted their demure reason never fails in its maturity of accomplishment to extort admiration from their instinct of beauty. The author's observations on the artificial style, continued Ellison, are less objectionable. A mixture of pure art in a garden scene adds to it a great beauty. This is just, as also is the reference to the sense of human interest. The principle expressed is incontrovertible, but there may be something beyond it. There may be an object in keeping with the principle, an object unattainable by the means ordinarily possessed by individuals, yet which, if attained, would lend a charm to the landscape garden far surpassing that which a sense of merely human interest could bestow. A poet, having a very unusual pecuniary resources, might, while retaining the necessary idea of art or culture, or, as our author expresses it, of interest, so imbue his designs at once with extent and novelty of beauty as to convey the sentiment of spiritual interference. It will be seen that in bringing about such result, he secures all the advantages of interest or design while relieving his work of the harshness or technicality of the worldly art. In the most rugged of wildernesses, in the most savage of the scenes of pure nature, there is apparent the art of a creator. Yet this art is apparent to reflection only. In no respect has it the obvious force of a feeling. Now, let us suppose this sense of the Almighty design to be one step depressed, to be brought into something like harmony or consistency with the sense of human art, to form an intermedium between the two. Let us imagine, for example, a landscape whose combined vastness and definitiveness, whose united beauty, magnificence, and strangeness shall convey the idea of care or culture or superintendence on the part of beings superior, yet akin to humanity. Then the sentiment of interest is preserved, while the art intervolved is made to assume the air of an intermediate or secondary nature, a nature which is not God, nor an emanation from God, but which still is nature in the sense of the handiwork of the angels that hover between man and God. Someone pick up.
Yeah, Lynn, can you come up? You got it. We are at, it was in devoting his enormous wealth.
He was in devoting his enormous wealth to the embodiment of a vision such as this, in the free exercise in the open air ensured by the personal superintendence of his plans, in the unceasing object which these plans afforded, in the high spirituality of the object, in the contempt of ambition which enabled him truly to feel, in the perennial springs with which it gratified, without possibility of satiating, that one master passion of his soul, the thirst for beauty. Above all, it was in the sympathy of a woman, not unwomanly, whose loveliness and love enveloped his existence in the purple atmosphere of paradise, that Ellison thought to find and found exemption from the ordinary cares of humanity, with a far greater amount of positive happiness that ever glowed in the rapt daydreams of de Stael. I despair of conveying to the reader any distinct conception of the marvels which my friend did actually accomplish. I wish to describe, but am disheartened by the difficulty of description and hesitate between detail and generality. Perhaps the better course will be to unite the two in their extremes. Mr. Ellison's first step regarded, of course, the choice of a locality, and scarcely had he commenced thinking on this point when the luxuriant nature of the Pacific Islands arrested his attention. In fact, he had made up his mind for a voyage to the South Seas when a night's reflection induced him to abandon the idea. Were I misanthropic, he said, such a locale would suit me. The thoroughness of its isolation and seclusion and the difficulty of ingress and egress would in such a case be the charm of charms. But as yet, I am not timid. I wish the composure, but not the depression of solitude. There must remain with me a certain control over the extent and duration of my repose. There will be frequent hours in which I shall need, too, the sympathy of the poetic in what I have done. Let me seek, then, a spot not far from a populous city, whose vicinity also will best enable me to execute my plans. In search of a suitable place so situated, Ellison traveled for several years, and I was permitted to accompany him. 1,000 spots with which I was enraptured he rejected without hesitation, for reasons which satisfied me in the end that he was right. We came at length to an elevated tableland of wonderful fertility and beauty, affording a panoramic prospect very little less in extent than that of Etna, and in Ellison's opinion, as well as my own, surpassing the far famed view from that mountain in all of the true elements of the picturesque. I am aware, said the traveler, as he drew a sigh of deep delight after gazing on the scene in trance for nearly an hour. I know from here, in my circumstances, 9/10 of the most fastidious of men would rest content. This panorama is indeed glorious, but I should rejoice in it but for the excess of its glory. The taste of all the architects I have ever known leads them, for the sake of prospect, to put up buildings on hilltops. The error is obvious. Grandeur in any of its moods, but especially in that of extent, startles, excites, and then fatigues, depresses. For the occasional scene, nothing can be better. For the constant view, nothing worse. And in constant view, the most objectionable phase of grandeur is its extent. The worst phase of extent, that of distance. It is at war with the sentiment and the sense of seclusion, and the sentiment and the sense which we seek to humor in retiring to the country. In looking from the summit of a mountain, we cannot help feel abroad in the world. The heartsick avoid distant prospects as a pestilence. It was not until the close of the 4th year of our search that we found a locality with which Ellison professed himself satisfied. It is, of course, needless to say where was this locality. The late death of my friend, in causing his domain to be thrown open to certain classes of visitors, has given to Arnheim a species of secret and subdued, if not solemn, celebrity, similar in kind, although infinitely superior in degree to that which so long distinguished Fonthill.
Do you want to rotate back? Dennis, you want to go again?
Okay, yeah, we don't have Kynan, huh?
No.
Okay, fine. I'll start again. We only have a small amount. The usual approach to Arnheim was by the river. The visitor left the city in the early morning. During the forenoon, he passed between shores of a tranquil and domestic beauty, on which grazed innumerable sheep, their white fleeces spotting the vivid green of rolling meadows. By degrees, the idea of cultivation subsided into that of merely pastoral care. This slowly became merged in a sense of retirement. This again in a consciousness of solitude. As the evening approached, the channel grew more narrow, the banks more and more precipitous, and these latter were clothed in richer, more profuse, and more somber foliage. The water increased in transparency. The stream took 1,000 turns so that at no moment could its gleaming surface be seen for a greater distance than a furlong. At every instant, the vessel seemed imprisoned within an enchanted circle, having insuperable and impenetrable walls of foliage, a roof of ultramarine satin, and no floor, the keel balancing itself with admirable nicety on that of a phantom bark, which by some accident, having been turned upside down, floated in constant company with the substantial one, for the purpose of sustaining it. The channel now became a gorge, although the term is somewhat inapplicable, and I employ it merely because the language has no word which better represents the most striking, not the most distinctive, feature of the scene. The character of gorge was maintained only in the height and parallelism of the shores. It was lost altogether in their other traits. The walls of the ravine, through which the clear water still tranquilly flowed, arose to an elevation of 100 and occasionally of 150 feet, and inclined so much toward each other as in a great measure to shut out the light of day, while the long plume-like moss which depended densely from the intertwining shrubberies overhead gave the whole chasm an air of funereal gloom. The windings became more frequent and intricate, and seemed often as if returning in upon themselves, so that the voyager had long lost all idea of direction. He was, moreover, enwrapped in an exquisite sense of the strange. The thought of nature still remained, but her character seemed to have undergone modification. There was a weird symmetry, a thrilling uniformity, a wizard propriety in these her works. Not a dead branch, not a withered leaf, not a stray pebble, not a patch of the brown earth was anywhere visible. The crystal water welled up against the clean granite or the unblemished moss with a sharpness of outline that delighted while it bewildered the eye. Having threaded the mazes, I'll do one more paragraph here. Having threaded the mazes of this channel for some hours, the gloom deepening every moment, a sharp and unexpected turn of the vessel brought it suddenly, as if dropped from heaven, into a circular basin, of very considerable extent when compared with the width of the gorge. It was about 200 yards in diameter, and girt in at all points but one, that immediately fronting the vessel as it entered, by hills equal in general height to the walls of the chasm, although of a thoroughly different character. Their sides sloped from the water's edge at an angle of some 45 degrees, and they were clothed from base to summit, not a perceptible point escaping, in a drapery of the most gorgeous flower blossoms, scarcely a green leaf being visible among the sea of odorous and fluctuating color. This basin was of great depth, but so transparent was the water that the bottom, which seemed to consist of a thick mass of small, round alabaster pebbles, was distinctly visible by glimpses. That is to say, wherever the eye could permit itself not to see, far down in the inverted heaven, the duplicate blooming of the hills. On these latter, there were no trees, nor even shrubs of any size. The impressions wrought on the observer were those of richness, warmth, color, quietude, uniformity, softness, delicacy, daintiness, voluptuousness, and a miraculous extremeness of culture that suggested dreams of a new race of fairies, laborious, tasteful, magnificent, and fastidious. But as the eye traced upward the myriad tinted slope, from its sharp junction with the water to its vague termination amid the folds of overhanging cloud, it became indeed difficult not to fancy a panoramic cataract of rubies, sapphires, opals, and golden onyxes rolling silently out of the sky.
The visitor, shooting suddenly into this bay from out the gloom of the ravine, is delighted but astounded by the full orb of the declining sun, which he had supposed to be already far below the horizon, but which now confronts him and forms the sole termination of an otherwise limitless vista seen through another chasm-like rift in the hills. But here the voyager quits the vessel which has borne him so far, and descends into a light canoe of ivory, stained with arabesque devices in vivid scarlet, both within and without. The poop and beak of this boat arise high above the water, with sharp points, so that the general form is that of an irregular crescent. It lies on the surface of the bay with the proud grace of a swan. On its ermine floor reposes a single feathery paddle of satin wood, but no oarsman or attendant is to be seen. The guest is bidden to be of good cheer, that the fates will take care of him. The larger vessel disappears, and he is left alone in the canoe, which lies apparently motionless in the middle of the lake, while he considers what course to pursue. However, he becomes aware of a gentle movement in the ferry bark. It slowly swings itself around until its prow points towards the sun. It advances with a gentle but gradually accelerated velocity, while the slight ripples it creates seem to break about the ivory side in divinest melody, seem to offer the only possible explanation of the soothing yet melancholy music for whose unseen origin the bewildered voyager looks around him in vain. The canoe steadily proceeds, and the rocky gate of the vista is approached so that its depths can be more distinctly seen. To the right arise a chain of lofty hills rudely and luxuriantly wooded. It is observed, however, that the trait of exquisite cleanness where the bank dips into the water still prevails. There is not one token of the usual river debris. To the left, the character of the scene is softer and more obviously artificial. Here, the bank slopes upward from the stream in a very gentle ascent, forming a broad sward of grass of a texture resembling nothing so much as velvet and of a brilliancy of green, which would bear comparison with the tint of the purest emerald. This plateau varies in width from 10 to 300 yards, reaching from the river brink to a wall 50 feet high, which extends in an infinity of curves, but following the general direction of the river until lost in the distance to the westward. The wall is of one continuous rock and has been formed by cutting perpendicularly the once rugged precipice of the stream's southern bank, but no trace of the labor has been suffered to remain. The chiseled stone has the hue of ages and is profusely overhung and overspread with the ivy, the coral honeysuckle, the eglantine, and the clematis. The uniformity of the top and bottom lines of the wall is, sorry,
Fully relieved.
yeah, of the wall is fully relieved by occasional trees of gigantic height, growing simply or in small groups, both along the plateau and in the domain behind the wall, but in close proximity to it, so that frequent limbs of the black walnut especially reach over and dip their pendant extremities into the water. Farther back, within the domain, the vision is impeded by an impenetrable screen of foliage. Okay, I guess I'll finish it since there's only. Or do you want to finish it off? Okay, go for it.
These things are observed during the canoe's gradual approach to what I have called the gate of the vista. On drawing nearer to this, however, its chasm-like appearance vanishes. A new outlet from the bay is discovered to the left, in which direction the wall is also seen to sweep, still following the general course of the stream. Down this new opening the eye cannot penetrate very far, for the stream, accompanied by the wall, still bends to the left until both are swallowed up by the leaves. The boat, nevertheless, glides magically into the winding channel, and here the shore opposite the wall is found to resemble the opposite the wall in the straight vista. Lofty hills, rising occasionally into mountains, and covered with vegetation in wild luxuriance, still shut in the scene. Floating gently onward, but with a velocity slightly augmented, the voyager, after many short turns, finds his progress apparently barred by a gigantic gate, or rather door, of burnished gold, elaborately carved and fretted, and reflecting the direct rays of the now fast sinking sun with an effulgence that seems to wreath the whole surrounding forest in flames. This gate is inserted into the lofty wall, which here appears to cross the river at right angles, In a few moments, however, it is seen that the main body of the water still sweeps in a gentle and extensive curve to the left, the wall following it as before, while a stream of considerable volume, diverging from the principal one, makes its way, with a slight ripple, under the door, and is thus hidden from sight. The canoe falls into the lesser channel, and then my apologies. The canoe falls into the lesser channel and approaches the gate. Its ponderous wings are slowly and musically expanded. The boat glides between them and commences a rapid descent into a vast amphitheater entirely begirt with purple mountains, whose bases are laved by a gleaming river throughout the full extent of their circuit. Meantime, the whole paradise of Arnheim bursts upon the view. There is a gush of entrancing melody. There is an oppressive sense of strange, sweet odor. There is a dreamlike intermingling of the eye of tall, slender eastern trees, bosky shrubberies, flocks of golden and crimson birds, lily-fringed lakes, meadows of violets, tulips, poppies, hyacinths, and tuberoses, long intertangled lines of silver streamlets, and, unsurprisingly, confusedly,
Upspringing, not surprisingly,
upspringing, confusedly from amid all, a mass of semi-Gothic, semi-Saracenic architecture, sustaining itself by miracle in mid-air, glittering in the red sunlight with 100 oriels, minarets, and pinnacles, and seeming the phantom handiwork, conjointly of the sylphs, of the fairies, of the genii, and of the gnomes.
Wow. That was like a philosophy document, a narrative, and a painting.
Okay, Jose,
Yeah.
you read from the final paragraph from meantime the whole paradise of Arnheim. Well, actually, the boat goes between the gates, right? The gates open up.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Right, because the boat glides between them. Yeah. And right. Sorry. So you want me to pick up from there from meantime the whole paradise?
Go from the canoe falls into the lesser channel.
The canoe falls into the lesser channel and approaches the gate. Its ponderous wings are slowly and musically expanded. The boat glides between them and commences a rapid descent into a vast amphitheater entirely begirt with purple mountains, whose bases are laved by a gleaming river throughout the full extent of their circuit. Meantime, the whole paradise of Arnheim bursts upon the view. There is a gush of entrancing melody. There is an oppressive sense of strange, sweet odor. There is a dreamlike intermingling to the eye of tall, slender eastern trees, bosky shrubberies, flocks of golden and crimson birds, lily-fringed lakes, meadows of violets, tulips, poppies, hyacinths, and tuberoses, long intertangled lines of silver streamlets, and upspringing confusedly from amid all, a mass of semi-Gothic, semi-Saracenic architecture, sustaining itself by miracle in mid-air, glittering in the red sunlight with 100 oriels, minarets, and pinnacles, and seeming the phantom handiwork conjointly of the sylphs, of the fairies, of the genii, and of the gnomes.
So, what does this describe? Anybody? But I guess we have something happening soon. So,
Well, my initial impression, and I don't remember the name of this painting, but you will know it. It's the one that's down in Washington D.C. in the National Art Gallery, and it's a series of 3 paintings of, like about when you start as a baby in the canoe, and then you kind of grow up and you're like a middle-aged man in the canoe, and then you're an old man in the canoe. That's just the initial thing that came to me at the end there. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I know what you're referring to. I just want to ask anybody, what is happening there in that last paragraph?
Well, people are thinking good afternoon to you too, Louisa. Thank you for coming on. Okay. Anyway.
Robert, describe to me what is happening. I'm talking about what's physically happening in that paragraph.
Well,
Come up so we can hear you.
yeah. I'm slightly confused because the canoe falls into the channel, its wings expand, and then the boat goes between the wings, right? So
Oh, wait, is that right?
that's what
No,
Does
it's
everybody agree? What?
no, its ponderous wings are slowly like I think. Yeah.
So those are the gate.
Yeah.
That's the gate.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was just my confusion.
Because
so
it's like it's opening up like wings.
like the doors of a lock
Yeah.
are opening. The canoe rapidly plunges into another. It's sort of reminiscent of the other circular stage that we had entered into before coming out of the original cavern.
Yeah, how big is this? How big is this thing that it enters into?
It said, what did it say? 30 yards or 200 yards?
10 to 300 yards. 10 by 300 yards or something like that.
The thing into which it enters?
No, you're right.
That was before.
That was before.
I'm not sure how big this is. I mean, there are mountains around it, so we're told that it's a vast amphitheater begirt with mountains. So it somehow bears a relation to the magnitude of mountains.
Right, and you are commencing a rapid descent into it. Anybody else? What does that mean? What are we talking about here? Anybody remember descend into the maelstrom?
Yeah.
So is the boats like sliding down the length of a mountain into the? Did we come out at the top of the mountains?
Apparently. That's how I'm thinking. It could be something different if somebody sees something different.
You think? What did you say?
That the boat comes in at the height of the mountain and then comes
And it's
down.
going down.
Goes down the height of the mountain.
Oh, sorry. I don't want to. If someone else has something else to say.
But
We're
then,
good.
Well, I was just gonna say there's the references to Dante, to Inferno, to Paradise. He references the woman who guides Dante in Paradise and who initially comes Beatrice, and then he meant meanwhile the whole Paradise.
When did he mention
where
Beatrice?
does he say?
Because he's talking about womanly. Hold on, I got it.
Right, there's no woman.
Yeah.
We never hear about Ellison's wife, right?
It was in the sympathy of a woman, not unwomanly, whose loveliness and love enveloped his existence in the purple atmosphere of paradise. So I mean, I know he's not directly talking about Beatrice, but the fact that, he's talking about a woman, paradise, and then he references paradise again.
Well,
meantime, the whole paradise of Arnheim, right?
Okay, well, let's ask a question so we all either agree or we don't agree. It's cool. Is this a reference to his being married to somebody or not? I'm asking. I'm not.
I won't. I certainly cannot claim to understand this whole thing, but I don't. I would not agree with that.
Okay.
Hold on. So we have someone here in the room who might want to say something.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Oh, I would just ask a clarifying question of why you'd ask that question in the first place, of why it would be someone entering a marriage.
Why what?
Why you said that his entering Arnheim is related to someone being married?
I didn't say that. Who said that?
Isn't that the question you asked? You said,
Well-
isn't this like getting married? Or
Well,
something like that?
Dennis, your question was
No,
in
he was
relation to the
asking
passage that
if
Jose
this
read. Is
actual
that correct?
Yeah, I'm saying,
Yeah.
oh, is there any physical woman here at any point? Does this reference that Ellison was enveloped by the love of a woman? What woman? Is,
Right.
Okay.
is there? Did we miss something here? Did he get married or what?
Was developed by the love of a woman, which could be
The sympathy of a woman whose loveliness enveloped his existence.
In the purple atmosphere of paradise.
yeah.
But I mean, there's no name ever given to anybody, right? Does,
Yeah.
Right.
He says his bride in his description of Ellison. The 1, 2, 3, the fourth paragraph. His
right?
family
And he was married to one of the one of the loveliest women, blah blah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's something, some allusion, but there's no name.
Right.
What's her name? Anybody? Did you find that? Okay, keep this in mind. The point here is that, see, this story is not symbolic.
I was going to ask, may I ask if is this Ellison man real, and this is someone who Poe actually knew and traveled with?
Well, there's an incident upon which this story, an element of the story, was provoked. And let me just read what that is. Okay. Hold it. An incident similar in outline to the one here imagined occurred not very long ago in England. The name of the fortunate heir was Thelluson, Thelluson. Thelluson. I first saw an account of this matter in the Tour. It's the name of a newspaper, apparently. Who makes the sum inherited 90 million pounds, and justly observes that, quote, in the contemplation of so vast a sum and of the services to which it might be applied, there is something even of the sublime, unquote. To suit the views of this article, I have followed the prince's statement. Prince's that refers to the person who made the statement, although a grossly exaggerated one. The German, in fact, the commencement of the present paper was published many years ago, etc. So he got the idea from something that had actually occurred. That's all.
Okay.
I'm curious. It strikes me that he's entering. When he's entering Arnheim, he's entering into something that is what would it be? This amphitheater surrounded by mountains, which is in a sense opposite to the mountain that him and Poe had ended up on top of, which he proclaimed was basically too beautiful for him to want to stay at. So in a sense, those two are opposites. And I'm curious of what categorizes Arnheim as perfect for Ellison. For it is not too beautiful. He does not feel that he is at the top of somewhere almost unattainable. And yet it contains for him something that enough for him to want to. What is he? He's here for Arnheim to want to cultivate land. Is that?
Well, why don't we make sure we actually know what he said?
Yeah.
For example, when it says upspringing confusedly from amid all, a mass of semi-Gothic, semi-Saracenic architecture, sustaining itself as if by miracle in mid-air.
Right. So that's not possible.
That's not possible.
Well, wait a minute. Well, hold on. Let's not say what that is. What is being said here?
What is Saracenic? I
I
have
mean, it's Islamic.
Arabic,
Islamic.
The
yeah.
Spanish arches.
Well, Spanish, no, the Spanish was Moorish. The Spanish is Arabic.
Yeah,
So
but
Spanish architecture was created by the Moors of Islam, as were most things in European culture of that period.
And you're saying Saracenic is distinct from that?
He's
No, that's what it
He's-
is.
he's
That's-
entering-
He said it's a combination of Islamic and Gothic architecture.
yes.
That's
Yeah, right.
architecture.
Exactly, which you can see in different places in Europe, of course, later. You see it in Tours. You see it in, in the Tours, you see it in Saint Denis, for example. some of the other places.
He's in, he's in Eden. I mean, that's that. I mean, when we were first reading this, I thought he's entering a different domain. He's transcending into another domain, and the reason I say Eden is because some of the themes that he was touching upon here reminded me of the power of words.
Mhm.
And their sort of discussion about vastness, infinity, the nature of perfection, beauty, and God. And so I think the end here, he's talking about, he's like trying to describe transcendence, as like then he's illustrating it through this taking a boat ride into the gates of heaven. But the reason I say Eden is because that's the Islamic belief, or the Islamic name for heaven, right? Or Jannah, or Aiden, Aidenn.
Right.
And that's the same heaven he refers to in the power of words, too.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing, which is I had a totally different sense reading this than reading Landor's
Right.
Cottage.
Mhm.
This is not Landor's Cottage. And in fact, I would say that it's almost the inverse of Landor's Cottage. I mean, this place is creepy, and this guy is self-centered and creepy. Mr. Ellison, in my view.
Now that's interesting. Now, how about the following? Remember this passage? A poet having very unusual pecuniary resources might, while retaining the necessary idea of art or culture, or as our author expresses it, of interest, so imbue his designs at once with extent and novelty of beauty as to convey the sentiment of spiritual interference. It will be seen that in bringing about such result, he secures all the advantages of interest or design, while relieving his work of the harshness or technicality of the worldly art. In other words, unlike a skyscraper, for example, which clearly is not imitating anything in nature, right? He doesn't want to have anything like that. He wants to have something which doesn't have the harshness or technicality of the worldly art. He then says, in the most rugged of wildernesses, in the most savage of the scenes of pure nature, there is apparently the art of a creator, yet this art is apparent to reflection only. In no respect has it the obvious force of a feeling. So you don't feel when you're out in nature that somehow somebody created this. You say that, but you only say it in reflection. It doesn't strike you like that got created by something you would consider to be merely extra human. He says, let us suppose this sense of the almighty design to be one step depressed, to be brought into something like harmony or consistency with the sense of human art, to form an intermedium between the two. Let us imagine, for example, a landscape whose combined vastness and definitiveness, whose united beauty, magnificence, and strangeness shall convey the idea of care or culture or superintendence, or the parts of being superior, yet akin to humanity. Then the sentiment of interest is preserved while the art intervolved is made to assume the air of an intermediate or secondary nature, a nature which is not God, nor an emanation from God, but which still is nature in the sense of the handiwork of the angels that hover between man and God.
I don't want to miss out on what's happening online here, Dennis. I just want to show you there's a little interaction that happened in the chat.
Go ahead.
Leslie Vaughn said, space-time is confused. There's an in-betweenness. Water is a transient state in a way, a creative state of mind. So she was responding. And then Samantha, I think, taking that up, said the river Styx is what I was thinking of.
What clearly the story is doing is its job, which is it's provoking people to think. That's very good. I'm not saying that just, oh yeah, it's wonderful, everybody has these different views. That's not my point at all. I think it's important to just consider, what is he saying this place is? Is this a city suspended in midair?
I I don't know how to articulate. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Is it a reflection? Hold on, let me just ask. But just ask. I'm just see where I'm going here. I'm not giving you any conclusion. I'm trying to say something. When you read this, it says things, right? There's a gush of entrancing melody. Okay, so we know there's music when this canoe comes down, comes across out of these past these gates, and it's clearly at the top because it's an amphitheater. It's seeing. Think about something. If you were in Greece and you were at the top of an amphitheater, you'd have this whole area that you were going down, right? Well, he's talking about an amphitheater as a natural amphitheater. The boat glides between the gates and commences a rapid descent into a vast amphitheater. Vast. Well, okay, football field, that's pretty big. It's bigger than a football field. Maybe it's bigger than 5 football fields, or 12, or 40. It's vast. That's all we know. It doesn't tell us how big it is. A vast amphitheater entirely begirt with purple mountains. Begirt. What's begirt mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
Anybody?
Ringed around. It's like belt. It's
Like a belt,
a belt.
right? That's with like a girdle, right? So it's saying that
Oh, so the amphitheater is like girdled around these mountains. Okay, that's nice.
yeah, it has mountains surrounding it.
Yeah.
Well, if it has mountains surrounding it, that means you're seeing the mountains as you're going like this. You're going down. It doesn't know what would straight. It's not straight, obviously. You
Well,
wouldn't be going out straight.
It's like the whole of a volcano or something, but it has some, volcano at rest.
well, I think well, Lynn just said she thought it's like the whole of a volcano,
Mhm.
but I think this is. I think this is Poe's. I think this is, in one sense, figurative of the comedy as a whole, because you have to go down in order to go up, but also every inferno, purgatory, and paradise is referenced. And you may be saying, well, where's the purgatory reference? Because he says Cato, and Cato the Younger is the first person you see, or Dante sees, when he comes up from hell and he starts to climb the ascent up to paradise from purgatory. Cato is the person who's supposed to be the watch guy, the keeper, and he's like, oh my god, no one's ever crawled out of hell before. But my point is that there's references to Dante sprinkled out here in the Commedia as a whole, and I think this thing about going down and yet coming up, I think that's another. Of course, it's not the definitive thing. It's not a conclusion thing. I think it's just another element.
Well, we know there are 2 stories now, right? There's this one, and there's the Domain of Arnheim, right? And we were told that the Domain of Arnheim is a pendant to this, right?
Yeah.
Is that what we're
Yeah.
told?
Which a pendant, like what I mean, like appendages, right? Like, is that what that means, right?
Look it up. The word pendant.
Well, a pendant is the thing you put around your neck.
Okay.
I think it means hanging.
Pendant. Definition. Let's just do that. Though the definition you look up is not necessarily all that something is. Okay. A piece of jewelry that hangs from a chain worn around the neck.
In artistic, literary, or musical composition intended to match or complement another.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's an assertion that was made by Lynn that, well, no, I think this is the opposite. Well, but actually, he says it's a pendant. Is it complementary?
Which one came out first?
Domain of Arnheim. But it was not. But they're not separated by very much
Right.
time. Think about what is this story about? The protagonist is dead when the story is being told to you.
Right.
Someone asked before, is he even real? Well, let's assume he was because he died. Let's say that. Okay. Okay. So we're supposed to, in the so-called narrative of this, presume this person's real.
Have to mention where it is because now there's all these people, which he says of a certain type, which is said a little bit like tourists or, not this guy's class of people tromping through there.
Oh, and what about the opening poem? The garden lady, like a lady fair was cut, that lay as if she slumbered in delight. Oh, the garden like, oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, anyway. Yeah, no, the garden like a lady fair was cut, that lay as if she slumbered in delight. And to the open skies her eyes did shut, the azure fields of heaven were assembled right, in a large round set with the flowers of light, the flowers de luz, and the round sparks of dew that hung upon the azure leaves did show, like twinkling stars that sparkle in the evening blue. Yeah, okay. I was reading that out loud, hoping that I would understand it better and its relationship to the story. And I think I do, because he says the garden like a lady fair was cut, and this whole thing about nature and whether or not it should be imitated or if it could be exalted.
What is the phrase? What are the two lines, the couplet there? The azure, the azure fields of heaven were assembled right in a large round set with the flowers of light. Anybody want to explain what that is?
I mean, that's the harmony of there's a harmonic. When he says assembled right, I take that to mean that there's it's ordered truly, and there's the large round set with the flowers of light. I would take to be a metaphor for the stars in the sky.
Yeah, the flowers de luz. Right. Go ahead. And then you're saying something.
No, not about that section. I had marked as we were reading it, Poe or whoever the narrator is, description of the character of Ellison, which is on the bottom of page 2, where he's describing, he has all these options of what he can do with his money, some of which are really bad and some of which are, kind of, things that might be generous. And then he says, I was not surprised, however, to perceive that he had long made up his mind on a point which had occasioned so much discussion to his friends, nor was I greatly astonished at the nature of his decision. In regard to individual charities, he had satisfied his conscience. In the possibility of any improvement, properly so called, being effected by man himself in the general condition of man, he had, and then he says, I'm sorry to confess it, little faith. Upon the whole, whether happily or unhappily, he was thrown back in very great measure upon self. And that's why I said I really didn't like Ellison. He was very selfish, which is, that's one point. I mean, it's all of the obviously effusive praise. Otherwise, he was a poet. He was a genius. He was this and that. But in fact, when it comes down to it, was selfish, and he built this thing for himself. And now he's dead, and people are tromping through.
I don't know, that's one possible thing that where you could also say the opposite. You could say that the reason he was thrust upon himself is because there was no one else who had the vision to do it. You could say that too. I'm just let's look at how this reads.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm trying to make sure that we either agree or disagree, or at least people have an idea. Is this city in midair?
Oh, yes, I think it is. I think it is because it's not supposed to be a real city, but yeah, in the sense of like a. Anyway, yes, I
Okay.
think it is.
All right, fine. That's what you think. What about other people? Does anybody think it's not, or do people not know? And if you don't know, what now? Let's also be clear. We aren't hearing about any other people. You're hearing about somebody coming in on a canoe, one person leaving it by themselves, and you're hearing this melody and these other things. What's happening in this city? I'm not even saying that critically. I'm simply saying that's one other thing here.
Yeah.
Now we know there are sheep.
And we know it's near, not too near, but it's
Near a city.
proximate to a city because he needs the labor and materials from the city.
See, the question here is to avoid the habit that has been foisted upon the United States, which is actually proto-fascist, which is to try to read everything through the prism of your or somebody else's political proclivity to judge things, as opposed to actually understand what's being said, including by anybody about anything. I'm just telling you, that's a big problem in the United States today.
I don't know what this last image is because
Mm-hmm.
it's highly specific. I mean, for example, when he says semi-Gothic, semi-Saracenic,
Mm-hmm.
it is of this world. It's not.
Right.
He doesn't remove all of the details of the world. He intentionally places that in there, but it's in a very dreamlike sequence of colorful animals and other things sort of overlapping, as there's also a description of this motion which seems also very dreamlike. So I really don't know, but what exactly we're meant to exactly picture or take away. But the image from before that stuck out to me most from the whole story, which seems related to this description of the miracle in the final image, is it's about like 6 paragraphs from the end. The paragraph starts having threaded the mazes of this channel for some hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's, if I remember correctly, we plunge into this. This is the circular basin. So there's kind of like a repetition, going back to what we were saying before about the sort of musical themes in Poe's writings, right? Like the scene that we're in here is like the same musical idea that comes back at the end in a less developed or in a different form. But at the end of that, he says the impressions wrought on the observer were those of richness, warmth, color, quietude, uniformity, softness, delicacy, daintiness, voluptuousness, and a miraculous extremeness of culture that suggested dreams of a new race of fairies, laborious, tasteful, magnificent, and fastidious. But as the eye traced upward the myriad-tinted slope from its sharp junction with the water to its vague termination amid the folds of overhanging cloud, it became indeed difficult not to fancy a panoramic cataract of rubies, sapphires, opals, and golden onyxes rolling silently out of the sky. So there it's explicit that it's fancy, but again, it's a very specific image.
Right. It's the idea of it is that this would not have been done by nature alone, but it's all natural.
Right. Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, then now reminded of the question we had that you asked actually last week. What is nature?
I guess to me, the description of thousands of gems coming out of the sky seemed quite similar to just visually and in sort of evocatively very similar to this tower sustaining itself by miracle in midair. I mean, the one other thought, which I think you might have
Yeah,
sort
but
of,
it's right there, right? He says their sides sloped from the water's edge at an angle of 45 degrees, and they were clothed from base to summit in a drapery of the most gorgeous flower blossoms, scarcely a green leaf being visible among the sea of odorous
oh, I see.
creating color. They're just there's
Yeah.
flowers. There's all kinds
Okay,
of flowers all on the side of the mountain.
So is this like, this is like the natural?
No, that's the whole point. That's exactly the whole point. It is, but it was designed. He designed it. He didn't
Right.
find this place. He designed this place.
Right, and he describes that. He said two styles of landscape gardening, the natural and the artificial, and he prefers the artificial.
Right.
But artificial doesn't mean what we think of necessarily as artificial. But what about artificial labor? Hamilton talks about that. That's the basis for that. Simply means art.
Yeah. Not like artificial sweeteners or something.
No, it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It's unrelated to that term. When he says artificial here, he's talking the same way that Hamilton used that term. I mean, he is. The Tennessee Valley Authority was done in some way with that sense. If you're there, you see lakes and you see grass and you see forest area, but it wasn't there before. All of it was created.
Yeah, right. The CCC. How
Yeah.
many national parks were created because of the CCC? It's all artificial. Central Park is artificial.
Yeah.
And it's also beautiful.
Right, well, this actually was written like around the time when they were thinking of the designing of Central Park, which we talked about a little bit last year, that was designed in, not in imitation, but in contrast to the, actually to the European gardens.
Yeah, like the gardens in Versailles, for one.
Yeah, which is, there's so much artifice really involved in that. And just in reading the Landor's Cottage, and I'd like to read that again. I mean, that struck me as being very beautiful and in a way simple, really, really beautiful and designed, but without artifice, almost like a spiritual, which is obviously could be thoroughly composed, particularly in the hands of certain of these masters like Roland Hayes and others, but are simple without being simplistic. They're designed, but they're not. They're different.
Let's ask a question. Landor's Cottage, is the nature in Landor's Cottage natural?
No, that's also designed, but it's like more. Well, one difference was there were actually people. There was a woman in there and she had a name. He called the name. That's different. And the guy that's in there has a name. So it just, I don't know. I just had a
I think people need to look at the two stories. I think that's the whole thing.
From that. Yeah.
There's a question. Is Dennis saying that what is natural, in quotes, is the creative spirit, that art is natural?
Well, for example, you don't know anything about nature except human nature. You can't.
What?
You can never encounter anything except for human nature. Because whatever it is you are perceiving as a human being. Your senses are only the senses of a human being. You do not have the senses of bees or of flies. A fly sees, or bee is encountering nature from the standpoint of bee nature. There is no nature which is objective as such that you could ever uh, experience. Eskimos see multiple shades of white where you don't. The reason they do is because they have to survive in a climate where it makes a difference how you perceive snow.
Well, yeah, right. They have like 32 different words for snow, right?
But they also have different perceptions,
Yeah.
physical perceptions of the actual snow than you would.
Yeah, but I don't want to get into it. Never mind.
Yeah, just think about it. Point of the thing is, it shows that what are they doing? It's clearly meaningful because they're navigating it where you couldn't. Now, are they human? Yes. Are you human? Yes. So what is this? The idea of nature, in other words, is different for them than it is for you, but it is only different in the sense that the neurophysiology develops to see differently.
Yeah.
What does it mean? It is different because they act on it in a different way. So their experience of nature is distinct from your experience of nature. But it's not subjective in the sense of, well, it's just what they arbitrarily decide they think nature is. That's why you have experiments. That's why you have inventions. Your experience, for example, of oil is completely different than the experience of oil of generations before approximately the 14th century or 15th century. You have some experience of oil like those people who simply grabbed it and used it for battle purposes, but from the standpoint of fuel, or from the standpoint of, for example, the use of petroleum in plastics, there is no such thing as nature in the way in which people claim that there is nature that you would ever experience. It may be there, but you will never know it, and humanity will never know it. It's only knowable by invention, and then the invention has a use such that the nature has to exist for it. It's like talking about air.
Well, I was
Yeah,
just about to
the
bring that
air,
up.
right?
But
or language, right?
Yeah, language is another thing like that,
The invention of the
right? There are things that you cannot say if you only speak a certain language. So if you can't speak the language of nature in a certain area, how do you know it? For example, how about the electromagnetic spectrum? How much of that is directly knowable or known to human beings? So the fact that you didn't know, or we don't know, that cosmic rays existed until basically the 20th century didn't mean they weren't there,
yeah.
right? But so far as we were concerned, they didn't exist. Till you discovered them. It's like the way that you think about the notion I've said before about being in space or going to space. What are you talking about? That's a ridiculous idea. Going to space is a ridiculous idea. You are always in space. You have nothing to, there's nothing for you to decide about that.
And for those who don't get it, we do support going back to the moon and Mars and beyond. Just a disclaimer. I don't want that to be used out of context.
What I'm saying is that you're not going back anywhere. You're not going back anywhere. The problem here is that people do not understand. There's several things. They don't, well, I won't get into that. Time is a function of action. It's not a box, for example. There's not a past, a present, and a future. Those are categories you can use. You can talk about it. But the question is, physically, what is it?
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of, so when you say time is a function of action, that's an idea of space-time, right? And,
yeah, well, for example, if there's no change, is there time?
right. But I guess what that immediately raises in my mind is like the question of in the individual will. Like it makes sense to me that you could say the world. I guess the question then is what is there an overarching time? Because we experience time subjectively. We want to say that there is something called time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're saying time is a function of action, I guess it raises in my mind how could separate things acting, how could there be separate distinct intentions acting together in the universe? How would the universe cohere? How does the universe cohere, given that is?
Well, you know that action is possible, right? And you know that action has to be change. You know that change is perceivable, as is no change. But it's you perceiving it, is my point.
Mm.
You have to do all this. Human beings have to do this for this to even be stated as an existent. If you don't have language, is there time?
Yeah, because there's still processes and actions that happen. Well, there was action that happened,
which you just spoke about, correct?
Well, yeah, but there was a time when there was a time when the planet that we're on was, but according to the current science understanding of how the formation of the Earth came to be, there was a time when this was molten rock. So that still happened before a human being ever said anything or did,
yes.
Right?
You say. You have to say it. My point is not that it's not there.
Yeah.
My point is that unless there is a human race to consider that, there is no human conception of the past. There is no conception of a so-called objective nature. There's no conception of a Big Bang. There may be those things, but for you to know anything of the nature of those things is a subjective act. You will never know those things from the standpoint of the inanimate objects of, for example, the moons of Saturn. You are not a moon of Saturn. You'll never experience the universe from that standpoint. But you could humanize a moon on Saturn. You could go to a moon on Saturn. You can talk about one of the 274 moons that we now know. So before we knew they were there, They were there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we know them to be there. Okay. And that's the point here. It's so human nature is the only nature you know, but you know that nature as change and not change. So the nature not changed by humanity, you call nature. The nature changed by it, you call, humanized or whatever you do. But the no change is equally dependent upon a conception of change, as is the change. You never get out of that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's simply that's the way you know things. So reading this story about Poe, we're sitting there trying to say, well, how's it really work? I mean, is it a city in the air or not? Is it? I mean, is a vessel going down a ravine or an amphitheater? He says, but what does it mean, amphitheater? Is it like seeing a giant valley and you're kind of floating down there? Is that what it is? Yeah, but everything that you're doing to figure that out is a thought experiment. It's done socially with a whole group of people. But what it does is it's an apprehension of change. So now you can do critical experiments to transform something outside of the self. And you do the experiment. If you follow certain principles, then the universe responds. The universe responds. It smiles at you. It doesn't kill you. It allows you to do certain things, like flying, for example, which you are not able to do physically, but we are able to do it physically. How's that work? Must be that we followed some principle that was embedded outside of us because we don't have the physiology to do it. And we did that. We can fly because we followed or adduced a universal principle. The principle is an idea. What's it mean? The universe is an idea. Human nature is the universe speaking to itself. That's why you can't talk about human beings as not essential to the universe. It's the universe speaking to itself. It's not the whole universe. We're just some minuscule thing somewhere in a very large area. But the idea of the universe we have is bigger than this galaxy and the 2 trillion other galaxies we know to exist. Our idea about that is bigger than all of that. We encompass that by apprehending it, even though 20 years from now, I'm probably not going to be here. See, so the notion of thought, which is really what this is, whatever else the story is, it's the idea that Poe is trying to get at is how thinking, how poetry, we'll put it that way, right, changes the universe, not merely through speech, right, but by our ability to think. That's so this landscape garden thing he's dealing with is this issue of the Garden of Eden. That's what he's saying. Well, really, why do you have volcanoes? Well, you have volcanoes because maybe it's supposed to be an expression of death. That's what he's saying, right? Floods, these other things that mess up. This comes about because the original design wasn't followed because you have the fall of mankind. And why you see this kind of thing, and that's one of the things he said there. Whether you believe it or not, that's not the point. It's an hypothesis that he's saying that Ellison puts out there about that's why you see this. So anyway, I just think that we went far out there. I think what should happen is people should basically read Lander's Cottage and then look at this. And then what we can then do is John Segerson has posed this idea about reading Eureka. I don't want to move to that, though I do want to introduce it. And I do want to introduce also a paper called Poetry Must Supersede Mathematics and Physics. We can make that available maybe in the chat. I have to get that as a link, Jose. Maybe we can do it next week.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's what we should do, so people can start to look at that, and we can talk about this more. Poetry must supersede mathematics in physics.
So as people can see, our camera battery is dying. That's what that little indicator there means. It means we've got about 5 minutes left before you get rainbows on my screen, and I think we've definitely extended the time here.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just take this moment to say, first of all, if you appreciate what we do here on the classes every week, which I certainly do, sustain us, continue to support us. We're having this fundraiser tomorrow. Help us meet. We have a $4,000 weekly quota. Like I said before, the legal limit an individual can donate is $3,500. You can go to votevega.nyc to keep this alive. And of course, yeah, Dennis, I'd be interested to know if somebody will be watching this 500 years from now in some class somewhere, trying to figure out what the hell they just read. Because I think that this was, assuming that video continues to be preserved in the way it seems like it may be, it'd be very interesting.
Or maybe someone is watching it 500 years from now.
Oh, well, right. That's right, because time is not, it's.
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah. All right. And hopefully they're not as frustrated as I am right now.
No, this is what George Clinton was trying to get at.
That's something we can leave behind. That's something that can stay here.
On that note.
All right. I'm going to end the stream. Take care, everyone. All right. That's it. We are out.